The courtroom fell silent as Judge Patricia Harmon raised her gavel. The German shepherd in the evidence cage hadn't stopped trembling since they'd brought him in. A 7-year-old former police canine named Atlas, his dark eyes fixed on the floor, ears pinned flat against his scarred head. "This animal has demonstrated a clear pattern of aggression," Judge Harmon stated, her voice echoing off the oak-paneled walls. 3 reported incidents of violence, a child hospitalized. The evidence is clear. Sarah Chen felt her throat close. She gripped the defendant's table, her knuckles white. As Atlas's court-appointed veterinary advocate, she'd spent the last 72 hours fighting for this hearing. 3 days of examining medical records, interviewing witnesses, chasing leads that everyone else had dismissed. "Your Honor, please, I have new evidence. If you'll just give me—" "Miss Chen, we've been through this." The judge's patience had worn thin. The animal attacked a 12-year-old girl unprovoked, mauled a jogger in the park, bit a postal worker requiring 16 stitches. The recommendation is unanimous. Euthanasia is the only responsible course of action. In the cage, Atlas's body went rigid. His breathing came in short, panicked gasps. Sarah recognized the signs. She'd seen them in countless trauma victims, both human and animal. This wasn't aggression. This was terror. "He's not aggressive," Sarah said quietly, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "He's protecting himself." Judge Harmon set down her gavel, something flickering in her expression. "Explain." Sarah pulled the tablet from her bag, her hands trembling. She'd almost missed it. One security camera, partially obscured by ivy, in the alley behind the Stewart residence where Atlas had been living since his handler died 6 months ago. The family who'd taken him in, who'd seemed so devastated, so bewildered by his sudden violent behavior. Marcus Stewart sat in the gallery, his teenage son Kyle beside him. Picture-perfect grieving family. Respected businessman. Little League coach. The man who'd promised the late Officer David Morrison that he'd give Atlas a good home. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that was only recovered this morning." Sarah connected the tablet to the courtroom display. Security footage from the neighbor's camera. The timestamp shows 3 hours before the incident with the jogger. The screen flickered to life, the alley behind the Stewart house. And there, Atlas, chained to a post in the narrow space between the garage and the fence. Even in the grainy footage, his ribs were visible through his coat. But it was what happened next that made the courtroom gasp. Kyle Stewart emerged from the back door, a baseball bat in his hands. 15 years old, honor roll student, altar boy. The first blow caught Atlas across the shoulders. The dog yelped, tried to back away, but the chain yanked him short. Another blow, and another. "Oh my God," someone whispered. Kyle was methodical, strategic. He knew exactly where to hit: ribs, legs, hindquarters. Places covered by Atlas's thick coat, places no one would see. Between strikes, he'd reach out suddenly, and Atlas would flinch, cower, his teeth bared not in aggression but desperation. "Stop this," Marcus Stewart stood, his face flushed. This is doctored. My son would never." "Sit down, Mr. Stewart." Judge Harmon's voice had gone cold. "Continue, Ms. Chen." Sarah advanced the footage. This is from 4 days ago, the day Atlas allegedly attacked unprovoked at the park. The screen showed the same alley. This time Kyle had friends with him. 3 teenage boys. They'd formed a circle around the chained dog. One had an electric cattle prod. Sarah watched Judge Harmon's face go pale. In the footage, Atlas was backed against the fence, nowhere to run. The boys were laughing, taking turns, seeing how close they could get before he snapped, conditioning him, training him to associate certain approaches, certain movements, with pain. The jogger who'd been attacked had been wearing a red baseball cap and raised his hand in greeting. The same red cap Kyle wore in the footage, the same sudden hand movement they'd taught Atlas to fear. The postal worker had carried a black stick, or scanner device, just like the cattle prod. The 12-year-old girl had reached toward Atlas suddenly, excitedly. Just like Kyle did before each blow, they weaponized his trauma, Sarah said quietly. Turned a decorated police K-9 into evidence for their own entertainment. When Atlas defended himself from what he'd been conditioned to see as attacks, they reported him. Built a case. Made sure he'd be put down. Why? Judge Harmon's voice was barely audible. Why would anyone— Insurance money. Sarah pulled up the next document. Officer Morrison's life insurance had a provision. If Atlas died by euthanasia due to behavioral issues within the first year of placement, the Stewarts would receive $50,000 designated for the dog's long-term care. But if Atlas lived out his natural life, that money would eventually revert to the K-9 unit. Marcus Stewart had stopped objecting. His face had gone gray. "There's more." Sarah advanced to another clip, her stomach churning. This one showed Kyle and his father talking in the alley, Marcus's hand on his son's shoulder. The audio was faint, but the lab had enhanced it. "Just a few more incidents," Marcus was saying. "Needs to look like a pattern. Then the judge will have no choice." "What if someone sees?" Kyle's voice uncertain. "Who's going to believe a dog over us?" The courtroom erupted. Bailiffs moved toward the Stewarts. Judge Harmon was calling for order, her gavel cracking like thunder. But Sarah only had eyes for Atlas. The dog had lifted his head. His dark eyes met hers for the first time since they'd brought him in. There was something ancient in that gaze, something knowing and unutterably weary. He'd seen the worst of humanity. He'd been betrayed by the species he'd spent his life serving. And yet... When the bailiff opened the cage to move him to safety, Atlas didn't cower, didn't snap. He stepped out slowly, his scarred body moving with the ghost of his former dignity, and he pressed against Sarah's legs. Trusting. One more time. 3 months later, Sarah sat on the back porch of her small house, her coffee going cold in her hands. The morning sun was just breaking through the trees, painting everything gold. Atlas lay at her feet, his head on his paws. The scars were still there. They'd never fully fade. But something in his eyes had changed. The hypervigilance had softened. He still startled at sudden movements, still avoided men in baseball caps. Trauma doesn't just disappear, but he'd started to play again. Gentle games of fetch, careful tug of war. Yesterday, he'd fallen asleep in a patch of sunlight with his legs in the air, snoring like a freight train. The first time she'd seen him truly, deeply at peace. Marcus Stewart was awaiting trial on animal cruelty charges, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. Kyle and his friends had been sentenced to juvenile detention and hundreds of hours of community service at animal shelters, where they'd learned firsthand about the consequences of their cruelty. But more than that, the footage had gone viral. Millions of views, millions of people who'd watched Atlas's suffering and said, "No more. Never again." The state legislature had passed new protections for retired service animals. Atlas's Law, they called it. Mandatory cameras in placement homes, regular wellness checks, strict penalties for abuse, a national registry to prevent abusers from adopting again. One dog's nightmare had become a catalyst for change. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another message in the thread that had been growing for months. Adoptive families for retired K9S, sharing updates. Max in Colorado, learning to be a pet after 8 years of bomb detection. Luna in Michigan, finally able to just be a dog. Brutus in Texas, helping a veteran with PTSD heal from his own wounds. All of them saved because Atlas had survived, because someone had believed him when he couldn't speak with words. "Hey boy." Sarah reached down, let Atlas sniff her hand before she scratched behind his ears, the way he liked it, gentle, predictable, safe. "Want to go for a walk?" His tail swept the porch, once, twice, still cautious with his joy, but it was there. They walked together through the quiet neighborhood, past houses waking up to Sunday morning. A little girl on a tricycle waved, and Sarah waved back, but she kept walking. Atlas wasn't ready for children yet, maybe he'd never be, and that was okay. At the park, she let him off the leash in the empty dog run. For a moment, Atlas just stood there, as if he couldn't quite believe he was free to move. Then slowly, he began to walk the perimeter, not playing, not performing, just existing, reclaiming space as his own. Sarah thought about all the times in the courtroom when she'd almost given up, when the evidence seemed insurmountable, when everyone had been so certain that Atlas was the monster in this story. But monsters don't tremble in fear. Monsters don't bear the scars of torture with dignity. Monsters don't choose to trust again after every reason not to. Atlas trotted back to her, a stick in his mouth. Not to play fetch, he wasn't there yet, but to show her, to share, this small moment of dog joy that the Stewarts had tried to beat out of him. She took the stick. "Good boy," she whispered. "Such a good boy." His tail wagged, just a little, but enough. The local news was doing a follow-up story that afternoon. Sarah had agreed to the interview reluctantly. She'd never wanted to be the face of this case, but the reporter had promised to focus on the changes, the legislation, the good that had come from something so terrible. They set up in Sarah's backyard, Atlas resting in the shade. Calm but watchful, always watchful. "What would you say to people who are fostering or adopting retired working dogs?" the reporter asked, her voice gentle. She'd done her homework, Sarah could tell. This wasn't about sensationalism. Sarah thought for a long moment, watching Atlas's chest rise and fall with his breathing. "I'd say, these animals have spent their entire lives serving us, protecting us, running into danger while we run away. They've seen things we can't imagine, done things that haunt them. And when their service ends, they deserve more than our gratitude. They deserve our patience, our understanding, our commitment to learning their language. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Atlas didn't attack those people because he was vicious. He defended himself because he'd been systematically taught that certain triggers meant pain was coming. And when no one believed him, when the system was failing him, his body remembered what his voice couldn't say. Do you think he'll ever fully recover? I think, Sarah said slowly, that recovery isn't always about going back to who you were before the trauma. Sometimes it's about becoming someone new, someone who survived, someone who carries their scars as proof that they refuse to break. She looked at Atlas, met his eyes. He blinked slowly at her, the dog equivalent of a kiss. He's not the same dog Officer Morrison worked with, Sarah continued. He'll never be that carefree again. But he's learning that not all hands hit. Not all raised voices mean violence. Not all love is a lie. That's recovery. That's healing. It's slow, and it's imperfect, and it's brave as hell. The reporter smiled, something genuine in her expression. What's next for you two? Sarah hadn't planned to say it, hadn't rehearsed this part, but watching Atlas in the dappled sunlight, his scarred body finally at rest, the words came naturally. We're going back to court. There are 37 other cases in this state alone, animals, facing euthanasia for behavioral issues that might be trauma responses. Dogs, horses, even a parrot whose owner claimed it was violent when really it was trying to communicate abuse. She smiled. Atlas is going to help me fight for them. Turns out, when you survive the worst, you're uniquely qualified to advocate for others going through it. 6 months after the trial, Judge Patricia Harmon made an unusual request. She wanted to meet Atlas. They met in her chambers on a Saturday, when the courthouse was quiet. Sarah kept Atlas close, watching for any signs of distress. Courtrooms meant cages and fear and people deciding his fate. But Judge Harmon didn't make any sudden movements. She sat on the floor, her honor, Patricia Harmon, who'd served on the bench for 23 years, sitting cross-legged on the carpet of her chambers. I've been thinking about your case for months, she said, not looking at Atlas directly, giving him space. In all my years, I've never been so wrong about something so important. Atlas sat at Sarah's feet, his body pressed against her legs. I was about to kill an innocent victim, Judge Harmon continued, her voice thick with emotion. Because I didn't know how to listen to what he was telling me. Because I thought I understood the language of evidence. But I'd forgotten that sometimes the truth speaks in trembling and scars and eyes that have seen too much. She finally looked at Atlas, tears tracking down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Atlas, who had every reason to hate this woman, did something extraordinary. He stood, walked slowly across the carpet, and sat in front of Judge Harmon, not cowering, not aggressive, just present. Sarah felt her own tears start. He forgives easier than people do. Then he's better than us, Judge Harmon said simply. She didn't reach out to pet him, didn't try to claim his trust, just sat there, letting him make the choice. After a long moment, Atlas leaned forward and sniffed her hand. Once, twice. Then he returned to Sarah's side. It wasn't a Hollywood ending, wasn't some magical moment of complete healing, but it was real. It was honest. It was Atlas saying, I see you trying. That matters. Judge Harmon stood, composing herself. I want you to know, I've started training, learning animal behavior science, trauma responses, how to read beyond the surface, and I've been speaking to other judges. We're developing new protocols for cases involving animals. She handed Sarah a folder. These are referrals, cases like Atlas's in other jurisdictions. They need someone who knows how to translate trauma into evidence, how to give voice to those who can't speak. Sarah took the folder, feeling the weight of it, not just paper, responsibility, hope, the chance to prevent more dogs from ending up in cages, waiting for someone to believe them. We'll take them, she said softly. On the first anniversary of Atlas's near execution, Sarah organized a gathering in the park where he'd been accused of attacking the jogger. The irony wasn't lost on her, reclaiming the space where his trauma had been weaponized against him. They came from everywhere, 50 retired K9S and their new families. Veterans with service dogs, abuse survivors, human and animal, who'd seen themselves in Atlas's story, media outlets covering the event, and in the center of it all, a bronze statue being unveiled. Atlas sat beside Sarah as the mayor pulled the covering away. The sculpture was simple, a German shepherd looking up, head tilted slightly, as if asking a question, asking to be seen. to be understood, to be believed. The plaque read, "In memory of all the service animals whose trauma was mistaken for violence, may we learn to listen to what they cannot say. Atlas's law, when those who serve us can no longer speak, we must learn their language." Atlas stared at the statue for a long moment, as if recognizing something in those bronze features. Then he did something Sarah had never seen him do in a crowd. He barked, not in fear, not in warning, but in recognition. In acknowledgement of all the others like him, the ones who'd been silenced, the ones who hadn't survived long enough for their truth to be heard. The other dogs joined in, a chorus of voices filling the park. And for a moment, Sarah could have sworn she heard in that canine symphony all the years of service, all the loyalty, all the trauma, and yes, all the hope. Because Atlas had survived, and in surviving he changed everything. That night, in the quiet of her living room, Sarah sat on the couch with Atlas's head in her lap. The news coverage played on mute. Images of the ceremony, interviews with families, footage of the statue. But she wasn't watching, she was just present. Here, with this scarred, impossible, magnificent creature who'd taught her that monsters don't always look like monsters, and victims don't always look like victims. "You know what the best part is?" she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "Kyle Stewart wrote to me last month. He's been in therapy, working with a counselor at the juvenile facility, learning about empathy, about the weight of his actions." Atlas's ear twitched, but he didn't tense. "He wanted me to tell you," Sarah's voice caught. "He said he knows you can never forgive him, said he doesn't deserve it, but he wanted you to know that he sees the dogs at the shelter differently now, sees their fear and recognizes what he did to cause it. He's been reading to them, sitting quietly in their kennels, learning their language." She looked down at Atlas, his dark eyes reflecting the lamplight. "He's not healed, probably never will be, not completely. But he's trying. Just like you." Atlas sighed, deep, bone-tired, the kind of sigh that carries months of tension finally releasing. "Yeah," Sarah whispered. "I feel it too." They sat like that for a long time, woman and dog, trauma survivor and trauma survivor, two creatures who'd learned that healing isn't a destination. It's a choice you make every morning when you wake up. The choice to try again. To trust again, even just a little. To believe that tomorrow might be different than today. And sometimes, when you're very lucky, tomorrow is different. Sometimes the world listens. Sometimes justice prevails. Sometimes a dog who was sentenced to die becomes the catalyst for saving thousands. Sometimes, despite everything, love wins. Atlas's breathing deepened, sleep finally claiming him. Sarah let the tears come. Not sad tears, but the kind that wash clean, that mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. "Good boy," she whispered into the quiet. "Such a good, brave, beautiful boy." His tail thumped once against the couch cushion. Even in sleep he was still speaking, still communicating, still trusting that someone would listen. And Sarah would. For as long as it took, for as long as he needed. Because that's what love does. It listens, it believes, it stays. Atlas's law was passed in 37 states within 2 years of the trial. Officer David Morrison's legacy lives on in every retired service animal who now receives mandatory wellness checks, every adoptive family who receives proper training, every trauma response that's recognized instead of punished. Atlas lived to be 14 years old, 7 years of peace for every year of service. He spent his final days in the sunshine, surrounded by the family who'd fought for him, and when he crossed the Rainbow Bridge, he did so knowing he'd changed the world. Because sometimes, the ones we dismiss as monsters are actually the ones trying to show us where the real monsters hide. We just have to be willing to see,